So let me just show you guys this. So if you see this drop here, this kind of vertical move, if you take that distance here to this low, which was the Terra Luna collapse, that distance is about $14,000 on Bitcoin from this high to this low. And then if you look at this sideways consolidation and you take this high right here to the low down here, this is also $14,000. So I mean, I think let's start with cryptocurrency. I think it's kind of an interesting period in crypto because we've just seen that big flush that took us below 20,000 to about 17.5, and then very quickly the next day we recovered back above the 2017 highs. So I think for me, that's the line in the sand right now, is that you can go below a previous pivot high, a major level like that, but the recovery is important. If we didn't recover and we were still below that level, it would signal near-term weakness. Right now, I actually think that we're in a position to maybe see a bounce over the next week or two, potentially back to 25,000, maybe as high as 28,000+, before, unfortunately, we probably see a little bit more downside. So you can see this move on Polygon. It's just been ripping up to the upside. You know, it got as low as about 30 cents. So it's up about 100%. And then if you look at other names, like even Solana has been showing us some relative strength, breaking up here off of these recent lows. So even though Bitcoin hasn't started to really rip to the upside, some of these more beaten down altcoins are, and I look at them as kind of a little bit of a leading indicator. I think if you go back to Solana, for instance, when Bitcoin was topping, this was still holding up relatively well before it really started to fall dramatically. So it makes sense to me that these could be showing a little bit of a risk on kind of take on the crypto markets, and that could be telling us that Bitcoin could likely get a bounce in the next week. And therefore, when you're starting to see the NASDAQ rip up, it's telling me that the risk on environment is starting to percolate again, and that's a positive for Bitcoin. One of the things to keep in mind, we're coming into the July 4th holiday week, next week, going into the weekend. And oftentimes that is a period where you'll see these type of moves get ready and kind of initiate. So I would be kind of surprised if we don't have a move up on Bitcoin in the next week and a half, back to at least 25,000. The bottom line is there's not space. I mean, think about overpopulation or the Darwinian impact. And I love referring it to Darwin and kind of survival of the fittest in terms of genetics, because it really does play a role here where there's just so much and you need to see that washout occur. So the fact that we're seeing Terra Luna collapse, we saw the UST, we saw the Celsius. I mean, this is exactly what actually should be happening. And it's not over yet, right? I mean, when you really need to see that when the dust settles, I mean, really about only 5 to 10% of cryptos should really have a functional, decent market cap after this. You know, otherwise, I just don't think it's over yet. Yeah, absolutely. So just talking about the 25,000, maybe 28,000 target, let's do some technical analysis work here. So one of the reasons why I thought that this was a short-term bottom was because of a couple factors. Number one, the obvious one is that we pierced the 2017 highs, right? So just naturally, that's going to be a massive level where people are saying, okay, maybe this is the low in the charts. But more importantly, you see this down candle here, and then look at how we broke below and we closed below that 2017 high, but very, very quickly we reversed right back up. That's what we call a bullish reversal candle. So in technical analysis, that's a positive. Now you're just going sideways here. So we've seen now the stock market starting to catch a bid. Assuming that holds, it's telling us that people are coming back to risk. At some point, they will finally take a stab and say, okay, we've made money in the NASDAQ. Now is the turn to make money in crypto. And I think that's where you get this push up. But again, I think it's important to look at it and say, you know, where are people investing it in, right? So, you know, now you have a majority, and this is kind of crazy, but a majority of holders, I think something like 70% of Bitcoin holders are now underwater significantly. So again, you know, that kind of, for them, it's obviously feeling pretty risky at this point, even though, yes, I mean, Bitcoin in 2009 was pennies versus where it currently sits. So it's been an incredible mover, which to me, it bodes very, very well for the long-term survival of it, you know, that type of thing. But I still think if you compare than the NASDAQ, for instance, to Bitcoin. Obviously, the NASDAQ's not dropping 85% every 4 years. So I'm just trying to compare apples to apples in that respect. So let me just show you guys this. So if you see this drop here, this kind of vertical move, if you take that distance here to this low, which was the Terra Luna collapse, that distance is about $14,000 on Bitcoin from this high to this low. And then if you look at this sideways consolidation and you take this high right here to the low down here, this is also $14,000. So those are little factors that I'm looking at which are positive for Bitcoin, at least in the next few weeks, maybe next month. And then really in terms of resistance, if we do get a bounce, you have to respect this low right here, this 25 and change low. That's going to be resistance. And if you continue up, this is really, I mean, look at all this choppiness right here.
And
if
like
price comes up underneath, that's going to be significant resistance. So I would say this is my low end target in the near term here, and this would be my high end target. At which point, I'm still in the camp that we probably do have more downside, just because I don't think we've seen full out despair. People are upset, they're hurting, it's horrible. And let me just say this, is that when I made the call for 20,000 Bitcoin in last October, November, by no means do I hate Bitcoin. In fact, I love Bitcoin. But as a technical trader, my job is not to love or hate anything. It's to be a neutral party where the chart dictates what I do. And that's what it is. It's like, when it bottoms out, I'm going to be all in, not all in, I'm in one asset, but I will be fully invested with my diversified portfolio in cryptocurrencies. But the chart has to tell me that first. And I think that's an important distinction, because it takes emotion out. And emotion is the worst thing for investors. It makes you do the wrong thing at the wrong time almost always. Every investor is swayed by emotion. It's so hard to control. The markets almost work in that way where they're going to push you to extremes. What I would always suggest, and this is kind of the way you kind of eliminate emotion to some extent, is number one, never invest more money than you can afford to lose, right? Because that's going to make you more emotional. When you overinvest, you're like, every little tick in the chart, you're like, oh my God, and then the other thing is, when you're in the money, just make a plan, turn off the computer, don't look at the charts, go to the paper and say, all right, I have X amount invested in Bitcoin. Every 5,000 up, I'm going to just take 10% off the table and just kind of take it. And you have to abide by that. Finding these rules and putting these rules in place, they tend to take out that emotional sway where, because you're right. I mean, you went on Twitter when we were at 65 or 69,000 and, Plan B was saying by the end of November, 100. I mean, there were so many things out there that just seemed so realistic and so like, oh my goodness, I can make more money. It's just a tendency for us to want to believe it. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it does get us into trouble. So we need to remember for the future to kind of put things in place that protect us. Remember, a pro trader is always looking at the negatives